"What's that old homeless guy doing in here?" whispered the store clerk, pointing at the ragged man shuffling through the aisles. Everyone watched as he pocketed a bruised apple with trembling hands. But when the judge saw his dog tags in court the next day, everything changed. Welcome to Hidden Heroes. Before we begin this powerful story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today, and if you believe stories like this need to be told, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Marcus Thompson had once stood tall in his marine blues, a figure of unwavering strength and discipline. Now, at 67, he drifted almost unseen through the weary veins of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a town whose soul seemed to have cracked alongside its boarded-up storefronts and rusting factories. Each morning, Marcus would sling his battered duffel bag over one shoulder and shuffle through the back alleys and forgotten streets. The bag seams were frayed, much like Marcus himself. Ever since the day Helen, his wife, his anchor, lost her battle with cancer, a battle that might have been won had the VA hospital not misdiagnosed her for months, he had sat helplessly by her side, watching the light drain from her with each passing day. When the end finally came, Marcus sold their modest brick house on Oak Street, gathered the proceeds, and true to Helen's final wishes, donated it all to the local animal rescue shelter she had adored. Afterward, he simply disappeared, not into the earth, but into a different kind of invisibility, the kind reserved for the broken-hearted and the forgotten. "Some battles end with medals," Marcus once murmured to a kindly church volunteer who had offered him a cup of coffee one snowy morning. "Others end with silence." Marcus never begged. He refused to surrender the last piece of dignity he had. Instead, he survived by collecting aluminum cans, scrapping for change, and living off leftover kindness from a few places like Rose's Diner, where the waitresses slipped him coffee and the occasional sandwich without fuss. Most people, however, chose to cross the street rather than see him. As December's bitter cold settled into Millbrook's bones, Marcus grew weaker. His coat, a relic from better days, was threadbare. His boots leaked snowmelt. Hunger gnawed at him with feral persistence. By the third day without a real meal, his hands were shaking so badly he struggled even to lift them. That afternoon, desperate and dizzy, Marcus stumbled into Henderson's Grocery, a squat building with a sagging awning and a cracked open sign. It smelled of old produce and cleaner, but to Marcus it was an oasis. He lingered near the produce section, eyeing a bin of bruised apples and day-old rolls piled haphazardly in a crate marked 50% off. His stomach twisted painfully. No one was watching. Mr. Henderson, the owner, was busy helping an elderly woman at the register. The single teenage stock boy was stacking cans at the far end of the store. Marcus hesitated, the moral weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders, but the hunger was stronger. With trembling fingers, he slipped a battered apple into the inside pocket of his jacket. Then a hard roll. His hands were so cold he could barely fasten the coat over them. He made his way toward the door, head bowed low, when a voice barked out, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Marcus froze. Mr. Henderson, his face purple with anger, marched toward him. I, Marcus stammered, but it didn't matter. Henderson had already reached for the phone, stabbing at the keys. "Police now," Henderson growled. "We don't tolerate thieves around here." Marcus didn't resist. He simply stood there, hollow-eyed and exhausted, his meager prize still tucked under his coat. Within minutes, a squad car pulled up. The fluorescent lights flickered harshly as two officers entered. Detective Ryan Mills, a burly man with a buzz cut, and Officer Sarah Chen, whose keen brown eyes immediately spotted the dog tags peeking from beneath Marcus's collar. "You served?" she asked quietly as Mills spoke loudly into his radio. Marcus managed a small nod. "Long time ago, when it mattered." Officer Chen hesitated just for a moment, but procedure was procedure. And so, before the scattered evening shoppers of Millbrook, Marcus Thompson was handcuffed and escorted from Henderson's Grocery, his dignity stripped away like an old tattered coat outside. Some people stared. Others looked away uncomfortable. No one stepped forward. No one asked if there was more to the story. The mugshot captured not just Marcus's face, but the deep lines etched there, not just by age, but by sorrow, loneliness, and a country that had once saluted him, but now barely acknowledged him. That night, as he sat in the municipal holding cell, Marcus carefully drew out a small, tattered photograph from inside his shirt. Helen's face smiled up at him, soft, bright, and forever young. He whispered into the cold, empty room, "I'm trying, love. I'm trying." Outside the barred window, the winter wind howled, and somewhere beyond that, destiny stirred. Morning in the Millbrook Municipal Court was a gray, mechanical thing. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering now and then as the worn floor tiles echoed with the shuffled steps of the weary, the desperate, and the defeated. Marcus Thompson shuffled in with the others, his boots scraping tiredly along the floor. The same tattered jacket hung from his bony shoulders, the fabric now stiff from last night's damp cold. His wrists ached from the cuffs, though the officers had not been unkind. It wasn't cruelty that bruised him. It was indifference. No family waited for him on the cracked wooden benches. No friends whispered encouragement from the gallery. Just Marcus hunched small at the defendant's table, his duffel bag tucked between his scuffed boots, as if it might still protect something precious inside. The clerk, a young woman with harried eyes and a bored tone, droned through the morning's docket. Case 19-842, the state versus Marcus Thompson. Marcus stood when his name was called, swaying slightly. His knees felt like brittle sticks. He could feel the quiet murmurs ripple through the courtroom. A few curious glances landed on him, then slid away, some with mild disgust, others with empty pity. At the prosecutor's table stood a young man named David Pierce, crisp in his blue suit, a fresh bar exam certificate still metaphorically clinging to his lapel. Pierce spoke briskly as if Marcus were an item to be moved along the morning's conveyor belt. "Your Honor," Pierce began, "the defendant was apprehended while committing a petty theft at Henderson's grocery. Surveillance footage confirms the theft. The defendant has no fixed address, no employment, prior minor citations for loitering and public intoxication. The state recommends remand until trial to prevent further offenses." Judge William Bennett, a stern figure with silver hair and wire-framed glasses, barely glanced at Marcus at first. His fingers tapped against the stack of arrest reports on his bench. Moving from case to case with road efficiency, he flipped open Marcus's file, expecting to find the same parade of sadness he saw daily when something slipped loose between the papers. It was a worn, scratched military dog tag attached to a thin chain. It clattered quietly onto the judge's bench. Bennett stilled. He leaned forward and for the first time looked directly at Marcus. Really looked. The name stamped into the metal caught his breath. Thompson Marcus JUSMC, blood type A, positive. Something deep in Bennett's chest stirred, a memory he hadn't called on in years. Muddy boots, gunfire cracking the air, the burning stench of diesel and blood. "Request a 5-minute recess," Judge Bennett said abruptly, interrupting the prosecutor mid-sentence. The clerk blinked, startled. Pierce hesitated, confused. Bennett didn't wait for approval. He rapped his gavel once, sharp and final. "Recess granted. Counsel approach," he ordered, rising from his bench and disappearing into his chambers. Marcus stood there, dazed. Around him, the courtroom buzzed with quiet confusion. No one had ever stopped the march of procedure for him before. No one had ever interrupted a system already moving to swallow him whole. He sat slowly, not daring to hope, not daring to think too far ahead. Meanwhile, behind the heavy oak doors of his chambers, Judge Bennett stood staring down at the dog tag he held in his palm. Marcus Thompson. He closed his eyes and let the years roll back. Fallujah, 2004. The second battle. The ambush. He could still feel the searing heat of the blast that had torn through their convoy, could still hear the ragged screams of men pinned under twisted metal. He could still remember the moment when a figure had hauled him bodily out of a burning Humvee, ignoring flying bullets, ignoring his own wounds. It had been Marcus Thompson, a man who had bled and fought and saved others without thought of reward. Now sitting in an orange jumpsuit over a bruised apple and a roll. Judge Bennett sat heavily in his chair, the file still open in front of him, the entries stabbed at his heart. Discharged honorably, 2005. 3 tours overseas, Bronze Star recipient, termination of VA benefits. 2007. Reason no known address. The next line was the most damning of all. Case closed. Closed, as if a man's life could simply be filed away and forgotten because he had no mailing address. Bennett ran a trembling hand through his hair. "God forgive us," he whispered. He knew in that moment that the law, the cold, indifferent law, had abandoned Marcus long before this petty theft ever happened. Marcus hunched further into his seat, feeling the hostile air pressing down on him. A young woman in the gallery, maybe a law student, maybe a reporter, watched him with wide, curious eyes, but no one spoke. No one approached. The minutes stretched painfully. At last, the heavy doors opened, and Judge Bennett emerged. But something about him had changed. Gone was the detached professionalism. Instead, he walked slowly, deliberately, his face set with a gravity that hushed even the whispered side conversations. He took his seat and looked straight at Marcus again. "Mr. Thompson," he said, voice low but firm, "before this court proceeds, I am ordering an immediate review of your military records and VA status. This case will be stayed until further notice." The prosecutor sputtered an objection, but Bennett silenced him with a raised hand. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "this court is requesting assistance from the Veterans Legal Defense Network to provide Mr. Thompson with pro bono representation effective immediately." Gasps fluttered through the courtroom. Marcus blinked, not understanding. Bennett leaned forward slightly, his voice softening just a fraction. "You are not invisible here, Staff Sergeant." The title hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Marcus bowed his head, hiding the sudden sting in his eyes. Outside the courthouse windows, snow began to fall, slow, quiet, and pure. For the first time in years, Marcus felt something he had nearly forgotten. Not hope, but the memory of it. And sometimes that was enough to start. That night, in the silence of his tiny cell, Marcus Thompson sat on the narrow bunk staring at the stained ceiling. He cradled the photograph of Helen in his rough hands, her smile still radiant after all these years, warming the chilled corners of his heart. "If you're lost, Marcus," her voice echoed from some soft, worn place inside him, "it's not forever. I'll wait for you." The words had been her comfort to him during his darkest deployments. Now, in the sterile loneliness of Millbrook's jail, they were all he had left. The guards treated him politely enough, but with that clinical distance reserved for the broken and forgotten. He ate a small tray of watery stew and a stale roll, but most of it remained untouched. Hunger no longer gnawed at him. It had been replaced by a colder emptiness. In the adjoining cell, a younger inmate, all bravado and bitterness, sneered as Marcus shifted painfully on his bunk. "Another old-timer thinking the world owes him," the boy muttered loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Bet you made up all them war stories, too." "PTSD? Yeah, right." When Marcus didn't respond, the kid pushed harder, giving Marcus a rough shove as he walked past to the sink. Marcus stumbled against the metal bunk, catching himself on the frame. Still, he said nothing. No rage, no retaliation, just a quiet endurance honed over too many years of fighting battles no one ever saw. Back in his seat, Marcus let the anger roll over him and away. He simply pressed Helen's picture to his chest, whispering so softly it was almost prayer. "Just holding on, darling. Just holding on." Across town in his dimly lit chambers, Judge William Bennett bent over stacks of documents and old military files. A pot of burnt coffee sat untouched beside him. He had pulled Marcus's military service record, and the more he read, the more a knot of shame twisted tighter inside his gut. Marcus's file was a tapestry of sacrifice. Bronze Star for valor, 2003 for shielding wounded comrades during a mortar attack. 2 Purple Hearts awarded for injuries sustained saving civilians during a street ambush. Combat Action Ribbon for direct engagement under enemy fire. And there among the commendations were mentions of Marcus's acts of humanity too. Letters from fellow Marines and even Iraqi civilians describing a man who had not just fought wars but carried wounded children, shared scarce food with strangers, taught young Marines to read and write in the dusty evenings between patrols. A true shepherd in the worst of storms. Bennett leaned back heavily, covering his face with his hands. How had they let him slip through the cracks? The answer was simple. They hadn't slipped. They had shoved him. When Marcus returned from his final deployment in 2005, Helen had been waiting. But the PTSD, unacknowledged and untreated, had eaten at him like rust. When Helen fell sick, he had tried to fight for her, tried to navigate the VA's impossible bureaucracy. But a missed appointment here, a lost piece of paperwork there, and their small, fragile life had crumbled. By 2007, with Helen gone, Marcus had no address to anchor him. No address, no benefits, no survival. Forgotten by the nation he had fought for. Until now. Bennett closed the file and reached for the phone. The next morning, Marcus sat shackled in the transport van, bumping along the icy streets back to the courthouse. He didn't expect anything different. More hearings, more polite apologies masked as legal procedures, more slow erosion. The bailiff unshackled him outside courtroom 3. "Straight inside, Sergeant," the bailiff said softly. "Sergeant." The word struck Marcus like a sudden hand to the chest. Inside, the atmosphere was different. The courtroom was full, not with angry citizens or bored lawyers, but with soldiers. 3 Marine officers stood at attention at the back of the courtroom, dressed in immaculate dress blues, the sharp creases in their trousers as crisp as razors. Behind them, a crowd of men and women in civilian clothes, some in old, proud veteran ball caps, others holding small American flags folded neatly against their chests. Marcus stopped short, overwhelmed. At his defense table sat a sharply dressed woman, a leather briefcase beside her chair. She rose when she saw him. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," she said, her voice calm but strong. "My name is Jessica Monroe, Veterans Legal Defense Network. I'm here to represent you." Marcus blinked, stunned. I don't have money for a lawyer." "You don't need it," she said with a small, fierce smile. "You have the truth." At the bench, Judge Bennett adjusted his glasses and nodded at Marcus. "Mr. Thompson," he said, voice clear and steady, "this court has been made aware of extraordinary circumstances regarding your history and service." The prosecutor, looking deeply uncomfortable, didn't even try to interrupt. Bennett continued, "We will be hearing critical testimony today on your behalf, and the court will act accordingly." Jessica placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's arm as Colonel David Reeves, one of the officers, took the stand. In measured, precise terms, Colonel Reeves detailed Marcus's valor, his sacrifices, his unwavering loyalty to his fellow Marines and to civilians alike. He presented hard evidence that Marcus's VA pension had been wrongfully terminated, robbing him not only of financial security, but of the vital mental health care he so desperately needed. "The injustice inflicted upon this man," Colonel Reeves finished, "is not merely a clerical error, it is a moral failure, and it demands correction." The words rang in the courtroom's heavy silence. Judge Bennett's voice broke slightly as he spoke. "This court recognizes Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson not as a vagrant or criminal, but as a decorated hero whose dignity we collectively failed to honor." He turned to the prosecutor. "Do you have anything further?" The young man, eyes glistening, shook his head. "The state moves to dismiss all charges, with prejudice." The gavel fell once, twice, sealing the words into official record. Dismissed. Gone. Marcus stood there uncertain as the room erupted, not into applause, but into something deeper. The quiet rustling of people rising to their feet, hands pressed respectfully over hearts, heads bowed. The Marine officers saluted him, not as a pitying gesture, but as one warrior to another. For the first time in almost 2 decades, Marcus Thompson stood tall, unbroken, and seen.